biggest question we all have revolves around cybersecurity space. Speed and high volume data, AI with humans, enterprises, data availability, integrity issues, and many issues the enterprises are facing. This session on artificial intelligence and cybersecurity in the network will focus on the various challenges faced and the solutions needed. For the session, I would like to call upon Venkat Krishnapur, VP of Engineering and Managing Director, Trellix India, Matan Babu Kasilingam, CISO, Vodafone Idea Limited, Priya Kanduri, CTO and VP, Cybersecurity Services, Happiest Minds Technologies, Abhish Kulkarni, Practice Manager, Advisory and Professional Services, AI Data Analytics, HPE India, Vishak Raman, Director, Security Business, Cisco India and SARC. The session will be moderated by Anil Chopra, Vice President, Research and Consulting, Cyber Media Research. Over to you, Anil.
Well, thanks, Smriti, for introducing the panelists and introducing this interesting panel discussion, which is on AI and cybersecurity in the network. Today, if we look at it, AI can be both an ally as well as an adversary, to the already challenging cybersecurity landscape. And it's no longer really a tool being used for productive and positive purposes. Even bad actors now are using it as a force multiplier. And this entire new era that we're seeing of offensive AI uses all kinds of machine learning to supercharge cyber attacks now, which can result in unpredictable, contextualized, faster, and even more stealth attacks. One such example is deepfakes, which leverage powerful technologies from machine learning and AI to kind of manipulate audio and video content with the high potential to deceive. In fact, in 2019, there was a report where an audio deepfake was used to persuade a CEO to transfer 220,000 euros to a fraudster's account. That is the power of deepfake. Now, when it comes to telcos, I think telecom networks are, some of the most data-intensive businesses in the world due to their scale. And, with voice being just one of the services that they offer, there are kind of many other industries are relying on telecom networks for their entire data connectivity needs, whether it's for e-commerce or for OTT or for social media apps, various messengers. And now, we're having IoT services as 5G implementations go mainstream. So now I think, when it comes to telcos, there's a need to develop capabilities to detect, interpret, and respond to attacks as quickly as the attackers. And of course, I'm saying telcos, but obviously the same thing is applicable to any large enterprise today. Because offensive AI is picking up. So, as we feel that AI-based security is a need of the hour. And, as the attack surface is simply too large for humans to handle in a lot of these large enterprises, especially telcos. And the question now is how confidently can CIOs and, chief information security officers, in the entire cyber defense ecosystem leverage AI to fight back. And, that's a question that we're going to explore today. So welcome everyone to this panel once again. And, my first question will be to you, Matan, about this entire trend of offensive AI. How really worrying is this trend for you? And, you've kind of been through, you've handled large networks across financial services, you've handled large network now at, mobile player. So how worrying is this trend and what can, new value can AI ML really add to cybersecurity? Apart from speed and high volume data crunching that AI has always been known for doing.
So I look at it from two aspects. One, the AI ML being used by the adversary, and potentially the AI ML that is being put across to use within the defender's hand appropriately. Obviously, it's an extremely high worrying fact that the adversaries' models, especially in the AI ML part of it, their models are extremely in advanced stages. Given the criteria that there is no need for them to have a boundary condition when they are doing it in an offensive manner. There is no boundary to them. They are absolutely can scrape across the world of digital information that is available in front of them. So evolving a model obviously depends on the kind of qualitative and quantitative information that is available in people's hand. Obviously, it is in much more enriched manner that is available with the adversary. So that's the first thing which is worrying fact for us. However, on the other side, if the similar AI ML as a technology, when it is put to use in the defending team's hand, obviously we are restricted with the quantum of information that is available within our hand, because we see obviously from the perspective that we would want to look at. So to train and coach the model, firstly we have very limited data sets possibly available within the enterprise fraternity. Even being a telco, we have our own constraints as to what should I, what have I within the legal framework as a possibility to look into. So the quality of the data set and the availability of the content itself in the defender's hand is far more lesser as lucratively available with the offending adversary. So that typically puts us in a back foot, largely because the ability for me to quickly evolve the AI, it relatively is going to take more time than what it is taking for the adversary, right? So is AIML good? Definitely a well-evolved technology that we should put to use. However, it in the hands of offensive side of it, it is actually going to be I would see it as a negative trend for me to look at. So obviously, humongous volume of data in the defender hand, it is still relatively less for us to contextually look at. The context and depth today is largely depend on the boundary that the enterprise would want to expand itself into. Given what we are discussing from a telco standpoint, like I briefly touched upon, no matter I am there as a road rail that is provided to most of customers, either in mobility space or in the enterprise space, given the boundary restrictions that we will operate, unless otherwise these enterprise customers become in a manner a managed service customer, where there is an engagement to look deeper into the data, bring in the context of what we want to look in from the security angle, it becomes relatively difficult. So evolution of a telco as a vertical into a technology provider for these enterprises, we are actually much more better equipped. But again, that goes with the rider, that how many customers we would land up onboarding and what kind of engagement that we would have with them. In that space, AI and ML will definitely come in the aid of enhancing the security portfolio that a telco can offer to their customers.
Thanks, Matan. I think good context you have set on this in terms of the adversaries actually being more prepared, for offensive attacks. So, Venkat, I'd like to understand from you about how is this, AI being really brought into the entire cybersecurity ecosystem, considering that, this is the kind of situation that we're in right now, as Matan pointed out.
So let me just begin. First of all, AI is not new, right? I mean, when you kind of look through the articles and how it evolved, the ability of computers to think like humans and designing it to think like humans has been in discussion since the 1950s. And what has happened over the many years, like there were many theories that would come and then go, etc., primarily because, a few things had not evolved at that point of time till around the 1990s and 2000 and beyond. What has made AI a reality today is really around, three things in my view. First of all, the compute power has significantly increased, and it is only increasing. And with the technologies such as quantum computing, it can only get even more powerful, right? That's the first factor. The second aspect is around the data itself. And when you talk about data, I'll kind of talk about the 4 V's. And the third one is the cloud. So when we look at the compute power, today We're talking about parallel computing, multi-core hardware processors. You have FPGAs like a field programmable array. Then you have ASICs, which are application-specific integrated circuits, GPUs that are being used. So the compute power. So in the past, the compute power drove the output. Today, the output is driving the compute power, which means it's the data that is driving the compute power in some ways. So that advancement has been significant. And then when you look at data itself, I talked about talking about the 4Vs. It's about the variety of data, the volume of data, the velocity of the data, and the veracity of the data. So when you look at variety in the cybersecurity space for companies and vendors who have been in this space for a number of years, like we have been over many decades, the amount of data that we have from a variety standpoint is just phenomenal. So you have the good and the bad data that we see. I think that puts us at a significantly higher advantage. The volume of data is the other aspect. And when you look at the volume of data today, the rate at which new malware is coming in is just humongous. And we have the volume, right? And the velocity at the rate at which it is coming in, I think is again significantly high. And what this does, it is perfect from a data analytics standpoint using artificial intelligence. So we use AI and the concepts of AI to do the classifications and then do the analytics and the predictive analytics and all of that because it's extremely ideal. And when you look at AI, it is learning and adapting. And when you look at cybersecurity and our own philosophy to cybersecurity, it's about being able to learn and adapt. We never say that we have 100% foolproof mechanism that will stop all attacks, right? And it's like essentially making a default assumption that we're going to be breached or we have already been breached. And it's all about learning and adapting. And AI perfectly fits into that kind of a model and a scenario. So to your question, I think, with all these factors coming in together, and we work heavily in the cloud where a lot of the data analytics happens, we have a very perfect sweet spot as far as using AI for cybersecurity is concerned. And that's what we have been doing as a company.
Thanks, Venkat. I think good, valid points. Compute is available, but then the volume, variety, and veracity of data is also increased, which kind of sets AI, in the perfect place to be, utilized to kind of manage that, being able to analyze that data and do all the kind of predictive and preventive, cybersecurity, combating cybersecurity threats. So thanks a lot. Priya, I have a different question for you. I believe you've been doing at Happiest Mind a lot of new interesting use cases. You've been putting AI to a lot of interesting use cases. Can you tell us a little bit about, some of the things that you've been doing?
Sure, Anil. And that is an interesting take, definitely. Predominantly AI/ML, as Venkat was also just talking about, and AI/ML has been around, and in the past couple of years, we've seen a lot of usage in terms of threat detection, threat analysis, and in some areas, threat prevention, remediation. AI/ML comes in handy in terms of gathering data, analysis, helping security experts with quicker decision making, etc. Those areas we've been doing a lot of work, and that's predominantly in the direct security operations and cyber defense area. But there are also some advanced areas of work that we have been doing, and something that we have been recommending all our customers to definitely implement, because that's like that should become the de facto cyber defense strategy moving forwards in some of those areas. Those include, for example, AI to anticipate attacks, by way of luring attackers, something like a honeypot technologies. especially for the cloud environments. That's something where you set up honeypots, lure attackers into these simulated environments, so you can analyze the strategies, components, and the code specifically. And also, these are on-demand sandbox kind of environments, using which the files and any extensions can be quickly decoded, executed before we take further decisions on such transactions, or those users are to be encouraged, or do we take those transactions from those IP addresses, those regions. There's a lot of intelligence that can be gathered for further prevention and more threat defense possible. That's one of the areas. And then there is definitely transaction level fraud prevention. That's one of the most attacked area for retail companies, especially in the last 2 years, transaction level fraud. So there are solutions. We work closely with digital businesses to, to provide real-time monitoring of those payment transactions, use ML techniques to identify anomalies and potential fraud attempts. And these models can also be trained to identify users' behavior, especially the consumer's behavior, login processes, and prevent any account takeover. Those are the fastest growing online fraud techniques today. We work closely with the data scientists from our retail customers in terms of identifying behaviors that don't fit in with a typical legitimate account holder, and stop impersonation. That's another use case. Account takeovers is another huge fraud in online transactions today. There are technologies available, wide usage of technologies with respect to Microsoft Azure ADS, and there's Okta, OneLogin, all context-aware authentication and access management. Once again, AI/ML adoption to implement, to take all external variables into account. What is the level of risk that enterprises can digest when user transactions are taking place with respect to authentication, authorization, access control. A lot of intelligence that's gathered, once again, using AI/ML techniques before we authorize and authenticate a user or not. And that becomes completely context aware. It goes a lot beyond your traditional MFAs, etc. And that's something that, once again, we are implementing for all the customers. We are encouraging all our customers to go for context aware authentication and authorization, which is nothing but a lot of AI/ML context usage. And prevention of ransomware is one more area, definitely. This is again, there are two ways. One is detection and the other one is prevention. And everybody understands patch management. Very good patch management system is the solution for ransomware. But it's not possible to do because there are thousands of vulnerabilities that are thrown, thousands of alerts coming in. Where do we implement the techniques of right patch management? Again, AI/ML based tools and technologies. Microsoft is one example. RiskSense is another example. That helps prioritize and also gather enough intelligence so you are able to focus on high risk systems first versus the low risk systems, and also which need. And then it also gets into a self-healing kind of mode. The endpoints will eventually be able to self-heal themselves, and that itself is the other use case that I was going to talk about, self-healing. Systems being able to, that's the other use case, where these endpoints become capable of correlating the threat data from emails, endpoints, identities, applications, transactions, and being able to assign risk codes to each and every one of those events and identify which of those will need fixing and alert the analyst. So our human interaction becomes less. That helps self-healing in the whole space of endpoint detection and prevention and EDR areas, and advanced end user computing. That's another use case that we are doing a lot of work in. These are the 5 areas which are the next gen use cases for us, Anil. Something that we are doing a lot of work in. And the AI/ML, the power of AI/ML really comes to the forefront when we are looking at such use cases, and we are encouraging all our customers to go for these extensions when it comes to AI/ML and cyber defense. And these vendors are all there in the play. We just have to, get the full potential of these use cases and implement those.
Thanks, Priya. I think good to hear all the use cases that that you're talking about. Many of them are actual, key enterprise pain points. They've always been pain points, and it's good to see that AI is actually now coming in to kind of help enterprises combat some of those key pain points, patch management, for instance, or the honeypots. So very interesting to hear all those perspectives. Thanks a lot, Priya. Abhish, my question to you, as Priya also talked about, there are, all these general pain points that have been there for a long time, and now because offensive AI has kind of picked up pace, it's important that you use AI for combating these pain points, which basically means that the pace of these offensive AI that's increasing, right? According to all the reports that we're seeing. Now, what can organizations really do to speed up the pace of development of their AI based initiatives and models and be ready to protect their IT infrastructure now?
Hey, thanks, Anil. I think very interesting question. And from HP side, we are doing a lot of work in this area. And I think thanks for the insight shared by Priya and Matan sir as well as Venkat. I think what we are trying to do is align ourselves strategically in three major areas. Around security, cyber security, as well as the AI. So the first and foremost is the hardware. As Venkat sir was also talking about, there's a lot of innovation that is happening in the hardware area now. So we have the hardware infrastructure available today, which is like kind of really custom made for training as well as for inferencing. So gone are the days where we used to have a general purpose hardware, and you can run whatever workload on top of that. HP has invested in specific coming up with a specific infrastructure for accelerated training, because again we all agree that we have tons of data, and also Matan sir was telling that the more data we have, the better model we can make. So how can we have an infrastructure where we can quickly churn maximum amount of data to come up with the better models? So we are investing in coming up with a very, very specific hardware infrastructure for training as well as for inferencing. These are two sides of any AI deployment as a whole. So you constantly keep on training, enhancing your models, and then you deploy those models to the production where actually the inferencing happens. On the second side, which is a software, again, we are strategically aligned here with the needs of our customers. And we have launched one platform called HP Esmeralda. I think it's one of the best platforms, for any enterprises to kickstart their AI or machine learning journey as a whole, or we would call it as more of an exploration. As one of our customers calls AI as an exploration and not a journey, because you will keep on learning newer things as you go along. So this software platform actually packages a lot of tools which are required for any organization to quickly start developing AI models. So one is you inherit the models from some of the application providers, or you can create your own models very rapidly. So this platform actually provides you the ability to quickly create new models and deploy as per your need. This will also give a lot of federation to how a data can be governed, because that is another area, and there is a lot of compliance around telco. What data can be shared, what data cannot be shared, how you can avoid generating biases within a model that you create, how can you anonymize data. So there's a lot of regulation that goes along how the data can be used to create newer models. So these software tools actually give you that flexibility to be within the compliance infrastructure of the country and develop those models. The third pillar is on the services side. So we have our own advisory and professional services organization, which works like a system integrator for our customers. So including the hardware, software, and our services, we can really help our customers to quickly start this journey of starting with the machine learning and adoption of AI and deploy those models very quickly.
Thanks, Avish. Thanks for
Thanks.
taking us through the the hardware, software, and services part of how HPE is providing solutions for kickstarting or fast tracking AI initiatives for enterprises. Vishak, you've heard a lot of these interesting points, and I know that Cisco has a lot of interesting AI ML solutions for enterprises. So I'd like to know your views about some of the changes that are happening that you're seeing in the cybersecurity space, to combat this new offensive AI especially if you could stress on, the, from the point of view of large telecom networks that carry so much business critical data, would be, great to hear your perspective on that.
Hey, thanks, Anil, and thanks rest of the panel. They set up a good stage for it. But I would like to simplify where AI use cases for cybersecurity. Broadly into three buckets. How do you look at simplifying your policy? How do you look at detection of the threat? It can be a predictive threat or it can be a reactive threat. And the last bucket is the response piece of it. But a lot of use cases actually on the detection side of it, both predictive and reactive. And the top 5 use cases, what we saw in the market is very clearly, I think Priya alluded to it very well, is transaction fraud detection. That's the first use case. The second big use case, what we saw in the globe, is file-based malware detection. Right? How do you apply use cases around AI to detect file-based malware detection? How do you look at process behavior analysis? And how do you differentiate between an abnormal system behavior? And the last detection piece where we saw was web domain and reputation assessment. So if you look at it, predominant use cases are around detection. And let me double click and give you one use case, a practical one, which we kind of practice it at Cisco, especially on the telecom side of it. We run one of the world's largest domain reputation solution, which is called as Umbrella, Cisco Umbrella, which is nothing but the Open DNS acquisition, right? And it spreads across about 200 billion DNS requests a day. That's a humongous amount of data what Cisco gets. And active users are about 100 million users spread across 190 countries. And the peering relationship is more than about 900 top ISPs, where we kind of do a BGP and content delivery networks to add that. But when we take that volume of data and then we apply it for a telecom network, how do you actually build those practical use cases? For example, we use an ML algorithm called spike rank model. That means if we see a malicious activity, have we seen it across the globe in multiple other carriers? And we also do something called predictive IP space monitoring. So we kind of use an ML technique to look at, have we found this particular domain name? What's the reputation of the domain? We use a specific ML algorithm called domain generation algorithm. How recent that website was coming in, because most of the hackers allude to a malicious website to download their payload, right? So we kind of give a domain generation algorithm a score where we kind of rate and then say this domain, the quality of the domain, where we have seen it in the past. So most of the telecom players use that scoring very effectively, look at blocking at the carrier level if the domain is actually malicious, right? And if Cisco Umbrella actually gives a rating saying that, yeah, this seems to be a newest domain, and we saw a very process behavior which is very specific to a malware family. That means, because you cannot control how many new domains can be created, right? So somewhere at the back end to sort of get those huge volume of data, we apply a huge ML techniques to normalize that and then correlate back to those specific carriers from a detection, and that to a predictive part. And I think that's where the market is shifting. It's no more a reactive. Can you predict an attack, right, at the brewing stage? And typically, a victim is used to go and download a payload from a malicious domain. So if you have a IP predictive spacing, you will know exactly from which IP, what reputation which it came from. Is it malicious, not malicious? And when is it you have seen it in the wild? And with the specific malware family attached to it. So I think a huge amount of work is going on the detection part of it. And as some of the panels actually touched upon on the remediation part of it, right? It's getting a lot of work done on security, operational, and task automation, especially the SOAR part of it. Can you simplify that automation part of it, right? And that's something Cisco is actually working on. But you can predict what you can detect. And so you can prevent what you can actually detect. So if you make the detection much more stronger, both predictive and reactive part of it, your your attack against those malicious actors becomes much better, and you're going to use AI in a far more effective way, in a simplified form, applying it in policy, detection, and response point of view. Back to you, Anil.
Thanks, Vishak. I think from all the panelists, I heard the word predictive come out in a big way, that, AI is being used for predictive and, to prevent attacks. I think preventive, a lot of solutions have already, been doing the preventive part of it. But now it's time to look at predictive, which is why, my next question comes to Matan. Being a user, and managing the security of a large network, what's really stopping us from making cybersecurity really, really predictive and extremely responsive? If we are now having the power of AI, as so many of our co-panelists have talked about today.
I think the challenge is largely not the technology limitation for us to begin with, Anil. That's not the limitation where we are finding it difficult to deploy this over the predictive analytics. While Venkat and Priya shared a lot of views around where it has been attempted to be deployed, the quantum of time and effort to understand the data set that is available within a corporate itself is a massive amount of time that is being spent. So whether when we look at it from a fraud analytics, I worked on these domain. That's precisely the reason that I am trying to highlight, to build a fraud analytics platform, no matter where native models came in from. Unless otherwise, the ability for us to look into the data sets and refine this constantly, the ability to predict, even in a very prescriptive data set that was available with us, the prediction model was evolving from, say, an accuracy rate of, say, 80% to begin with. To achieve a 95%, there was mammoth amount of effort that were to be put out. And I'm sure all people who engage with data scientists do acknowledge and understand the difficulties. Once you have achieved the 95, every single percentage increase that you were to show, it is the mammotthness only becomes multifold, right? So the issue is largely the expertise, the knowledge levels of people in understanding these data sets and making it into a analytical model that is applicable to each of the enterprises. And most so often that I have seen is that data set that is applicable, majority of these security players have built, say, for an industry vertical, and tried and come back to yet another customer belonging to the same industry vertical. Even over there, the model has to be coached, refined, and fine-tuned to a greater extent before it can become a acceptable, usable model for a customer. So the challenge is because internally we are all not a net new Gen Z born company. We have been historically been here in the industry, evolved with a variety of technologies that have put in forth over multiple decades. Each of these have different variety of information in different formats that it sends back. So refining this data set in the most appropriate manner to make it predictive is where the largest challenge lies. It's normally claimed that garbage in, garbage out. It's exactly applicable to the AI models that gets built. So the predictability, we are far from reality when it comes to predictability. It is not that it is not possible to achieve. It is a quantum of time and expertise that are required to spend. There are partners who come and try and build this across, who lack typically the end enterprise domain knowledge on understanding these data sets, which is where bridging this gap makes it slightly more difficult for us. While in the adversary side, all this time, energy, effort, domain expertise people do have, and they have the ability to coach and build this far more quickly, right? That's a flip side of it.
Yeah, absolutely, Matan. I think you hit the nail on the head. On one side, you have so much of data, and you'll be able to create models, and even to achieve 1% more of accuracy beyond 95% is a mammoth task. And on the other side, the adversaries are already having a lot of skill sets to be able to use AI in the manner to be able to do harm. which is where, my question to you comes in, Venkat, is in terms of this, where are we seeing in terms of, how evolved is this really adversarial or offensive AI? And, what can the cyber defense side really do to be better equipped here to combat some of the challenges that Matan really talked about?
So there, in fact, the context itself is to leverage rather. Sorry, is that to Venkat? My apologies.
That was to Venkat, but absolutely. After Venkat gives the
Go
answer,
ahead, Matan, give a couple of minutes of your perspective, and I'll add on to that. Go ahead.
Sure. I'll just take 30 seconds, not much of the time. So the premise itself is, if you look at corporates today, in-house started to leverage the offensive AI for their own native use cases as well. So when I say offensive AI, it is largely to look at it from whether we want to call it as a red teaming, whichever format or not. Looking from the shoes of how a typical attack methodology may evolve, there are hypothesis-based simulation that typically corporates, in name of offensive, I wouldn't want to call it out as completely offensive, for the simple reason offensive is cross-border, beyond your boundary of corporate. That's how I look at. Nominating few to do that within your own border is exactly what I think corporates can put to use to evolve this very quickly. Over to you, Venkat.
Thanks, Matan. So my response is, we live in a world where it's a cat and mouse game, right? So we develop technology, and right behind us are these attackers and the criminals and so on and so forth, who are constantly looking to see how do we overcome that new technology that we might come up with, right? So we need, for us to survive as an industry, we need to make sure that regardless of which new technology we develop, we are constantly surging ahead so that we don't give the advantages of, or any advantage to the hackers. So when you look at it from an AI perspective, adversarial machine learning is exactly what these cyber criminals are trying to do, where they are using machine learning models to understand our own machine learning and then apply that to circumvent and overcome that. And we see various forms of how they do that, right? So you have they can do it in a white box environment, they can do it in a black box environment. So which means like they use evasion tactics, they use the data itself to confuse and manipulate the classification models. And that you reverse engineering all the time, trying to figure out how is the model thinking so that they can circumvent. So this is a cat and mouse game that is a reality. And to your question in terms of how do we manage that? I think a lot of that goes back to something that I also stated earlier, right? Which means since a lot of the attacks actually happens through data manipulation, I think and how the algorithms are built and how they're equipped. It's about hardening these algorithms and making them aware, and especially the data when you're going through the learning phase and teaching the models how they need to classify, how they need to respond, and so on and so forth. What you really need to do is make sure that you're providing, not only just clean data, but there is also other kinds of data that needs to go in. Some of the other techniques that we also do is like, we'd have to do threat modeling. Typically, like we do in a traditional cyber security kind of an environment, threat modeling is something that we have to do. And we kind of understand how, think like the criminal, and then apply how is he going to change the data? What is the data that is exposed? How do we make sure that, even if he tampers with the data, how is my model going to respond to that in such a way that it doesn't get fooled or foxed? Then it's about also creating attack simulations, right? It's about, using, thinking again like the attacker, and then devising attack strategies, etc., that are built into your testing of your algorithms and of the models and everything else. And you also need to have countermeasure designs. So which means like, if this happens, how do I respond, right? It's also about making sure that you have built-in systems that can detect noise. There's a significant amount of noise that can be introduced into your data to confuse the data. In often cases, oftentimes you don't even need significant amount of data. With a very small change to the value or the type of data, or either through obfuscation or through any other means, by data tampering, you can completely fox the system. What would be a dog can become a cat in no time by simple data manipulation. And what we need to do is make sure that we have built-in systems and hardened our models in such a way that they're not going to get foxed. If we are talking about making sure that we have adversarial training in some way, it's about sanitizing the training data in such a way that you have both clean data, bad data, and a mix of using game theory models that will simulate certain conditions and think of what are the kind of situations that might crop up and pass that into another model, and therefore they work in tandem in what is known as distillation process, where you're able to then use the combined information to make sure that you're not getting foxed, right? So there are, like the attackers are constantly trying to come and then use the very own technologies that we have, the tactics, the techniques, and the procedures that we develop. So we also need to constantly evolve, and it's about constantly learning, constantly evolving, constantly responding to threats. And also with all of this comes the ability to predict, because you now have patterns that are getting created. And the moment you see a certain pattern, you're able to detect and then say, hey, this is the kind of pattern I have. And the advantage that you get with the compute power that we have and the data and the classifications that have happened subsequently from these data models is your ability to do predictive analytics. So I think, with all of this, we have, as long as you have the right data, you have the right mechanisms, your algorithms are solidified. I think all of these go together to make your whole AI process that much more sticky and that much more stronger.
Thank you, Venkat. Absolutely, yeah. What you said is the right path, but that's it'll take a lot of effort to be able to harden all the algorithms and be able to do a lot of those steps that you talked about. But yeah, absolutely, I think that it needs to be done. Priya, which is where an interesting question to you comes in. And of course, just to keep a time check, we have about 5 minutes left. So I would request everyone to keep the answers short and to the point. Priya, which scenario do you think now is faster given the current situation, and which is better and more effective against attackers? AI with humans in the loop or without them? What will really work better?
Yeah, one of the issues that we are trying to solve using AI ML in cyber defense is the human burnout. There's too much information to process. There's a lot of and it's a 24/7 kind of work. There's information to process and information that's not being processed to worry about. This is the problem that AI ML addresses, the machine learning addresses. But at the same time, machine learning, completely AI ML driven models can throw a lot of false positives, which is more counterproductive than effective. And so what would be best is definitely a combination of human experts with machine learning, which is also, what I'm trying to get to is supervised machine learning. That can have better results than a completely human or completely machine driven cyber defense mechanism. We definitely need human intervention or human in the loop to analyze the data to see how malicious the threats are. AI/ML can throw a lot of false positives. We need somebody to analyze and also annotate that data, which can go back as a feedback into the system. So the systems are constantly fed data. They can pick up suspicious activity using the ML skills. And then human analysts will take a look and judge whether those, how suspicious those events are, what are the risk scores, what needs fixing versus what is just an alert or alarm. And then the feedback goes back into the system and there is a constant improvement mechanism. That's what's really required. This will help enterprises who already have human analysts in place because all the knowledge can be fed into the system. This also helps enterprises where there is lack of human skills because they can benefit from the intelligence that is processed by other enterprises. The tools and technologies bring in this kind of intelligence from all over the world, and they can benefit from that. And end of the day, our attackers are humans. Unless you have humans defending, you cannot completely protect an enterprise. Human behavior requires human behavior for analysis. for known threats, AI/ML, and for implementing new models and bringing in new patterns and new intelligence, we definitely need human in the equation.
Thanks, Priya. Absolutely. I think AI cannot just run on its own. It does require supervision, and it requires the required skill sets. And that is where my next question to you comes, Abhish. I think Mathan also referred to it, that, you need to have the required skill sets to be able to, train, models, and be able to, combat, have AI implementation algorithms in place and all that. So, and it's one of the topmost concerns, skilled resources. And it's an area where everyone's struggling. So what's being done to really help enterprises pick up the pace of AI adoption despite the skill gap?
Yeah, so we are trying to help in two ways. I would put it that way. So the first one is, we already have quite a large amount of resources, the investment that we have done upfront to get these professionals with us in our center of excellence as well as in our delivery center. So we leverage our India as well as the worldwide center of excellence as well as the delivery centers to deliver those AI solutions to our customers, which obviously comprise of everything that I talked about earlier, right? The hardware, software, and the services part of it. On the other side, the next one, what we are trying to do is we have started this program a couple of years back, which we call as a digital catalyst program. So this is where we actually tie up with or we incubate a lot of startups within India. And these are like startup small companies where they have excellent solutions, very, very innovative, cutting edge solutions in the area of cybersecurity, AI, as well as, related field. So what we're trying to do here is get that expertise and put it across the larger customer base that we have. So we are bringing that expertise directly from HP side to help customers to quickly start that path, as well as we are having this digital catalyst, or we have another program called Pathfinder, which runs in US, which is a similar line where we tie up with startups as well as we incubate them. We do invest in them as well to bring those solutions, because this growth has to be inorganic. No company on its own can really catch up with the pace of the way the technology is progressing. So we have tried to do the organic as well as the inorganic way of addressing this problem, and this end-to-end solutions are available from our side to our customers. So it is HP plus our extended ecosystem partners. We stitch the entire solution and offer that as a end-to-end solution to our customers. So that is how we are trying to see that how we can really mitigate the skill gap, because it's a real problem in India. Even if a normal a developer today, it is really a challenging task for all of us to get good skilled people in the country. So we are just trying to try out different models. Hopefully we'll be successful in that.
Yeah, absolutely, Abhish. I'm sure you will be. Thanks a lot for pointing that out. Vishak, last
Thanks.
question to you. I think organizations already have so many complex security tools. How can they really integrate AI-based security into existing the entire already complex IT networks that already have all these large number of tools? What's your view on that?
First of all, any AI use case has to bring in two important metrics. What is the business value of deploying that, and what is the feasibility of that as well? So when you actually take the bucket of business value, right, does it improve the security posture management? Does it give you a threat vector which was not detected before? So it's the second piece is on the business value is threat vector criticality, and the third is operational efficiency. Am I improving my operational efficiency? So security posture, threat vector, and operational efficiency is the business value. But there is an important other element, which is the feasibility of it, right? Is my organization ready to use AI and ML from a defender's point of view? So it is the foundation of the organization readiness to use that, right? And of course, feasibility on the technical side of it. So if you keep these 5 parameters, does it improve the security posture management? Does it address a threat vector which you have not been able to sort of decipher because of the complexity? Third, does it improve the operational efficiency? And fourth, what's the technical feasibility and the organization fit, the organization readiness? So if you want to adopt AI ML in cybersecurity, please evaluate in these 5 parameters on the business value and the feasibility of it. That would be my last word on this. Back to you. That's a non-technical answer.
No, absolutely non-technical, but very, very relevant. It's a way of kind of summing up this entire thing, because every organization would have their own unique requirements and have their own complex IT setups. But it's important to kind of look at it at that level to be able to really understand how to integrate AI and ML into the entire cybersecurity. So thanks, Vishak. I think very well summarized. With that, we come to the end of the panel discussion. Thank you so much to all of you for sparing your valuable time. I think we've had a very interesting discussion. We've got a lot of good perspectives. I appreciate your taking out time for doing this. So thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, speakers, for such an informative and a great session.